Have you ever been underestimated? Look at Emma Johnson, a woman dressed in simple jeans and a t-shirt, walking into a prestigious concert hall like she belonged there. The moment she entered, people stared, some whispered, others outright snickered. But what they didn't know is that she was about to prove everyone wrong in the most unexpected way. Nathaniel Rivers, a world-renowned pianist, stood on stage, exuding arrogance as he prepared for his performance. Known for his sharp intellect and quicker temper, Nathaniel was already in a bad mood when he noticed Emma sitting at the back, blending into the crowd. A woman like her didn't belong in a place like this. It wasn't just his thoughts. His followers had always believed that anyone who wasn't a master like him was nothing more than background noise, especially not someone like Emma. He couldn't resist the temptation. He turned to the audience with a smug smile, raising his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "I wonder if there's anyone in the audience bold enough to challenge me," Nathaniel announced, his fingers tapping the piano keys in a casual rhythm. "I'm always looking for a worthy competitor. Maybe some of you believe you could match my skills? Anyone? Anyone at all?" The room was silent at first, but then Nathaniel's eyes locked onto Emma. He chuckled to himself and pointed in her direction. "How about you, miss?" he said with a mock smile. "Care to join me? I'm sure you'll be able to show us all your talents." The crowd waited, and Emma's heart raced for a moment. She could feel the heat of their eyes on her, the judgment hanging in the air like a thick fog. But instead of shrinking away, she stood up slowly, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the way her heart pounded in her chest. "I'll give it a try," she said quietly, surprising herself with her own courage. As she walked to the stage, her mind was a whirlwind of memories, of the countless hours she spent practicing piano in the small, humble apartment she called home. The keys, the notes, the music that had been her sanctuary for so many years. She could do this. She had to. Nathaniel watched her walk toward the piano, his lips curled, in an arrogant grin. She didn't belong here. He'd make sure of that. Emma sat down at the grand piano. The moment she touched the keys, the room held its breath. Nathaniel was already preparing to show off, to dominate the stage like he always did. But what Emma did next shocked him, and the entire audience. As her fingers danced over the keys, the beautiful melody she produced was far beyond what anyone had expected. The smoothness of her movements, the precision, the emotion that poured from her every note. It was as if the piano had become an extension of her soul. Nathaniel's grin faltered, then disappeared entirely as Emma's music filled the room, sweeping over everyone like a tidal wave. His fingers, once poised with superiority, now seemed clumsy in comparison. The crowd was mesmerized, their faces frozen in disbelief. No one had expected this. No one had thought that this quiet, unassuming woman could bring the concert hall to a standstill with her performance. And yet, here she was, playing with such grace, such skill, that even Nathaniel's sharp pride couldn't deny her brilliance. As the last note hung in the air, a hush fell over the audience. Nathaniel stood there, frozen, unable to find the words to respond. The applause came slowly at first, then built into a thunderous roar. The room was filled with admiration for Emma, the woman who had turned the tables and shown them all what true talent looked like. Nathaniel stood speechless, humbled, and in that moment, Emma's calm smile was all the victory she needed. The crowd erupted, not in mockery, but in respect. Emma had proven that no one should ever be underestimated, no matter their appearance. And for Nathaniel, it was a lesson in humility he would never forget. As Emma stood up from the piano, the applause echoed through the concert hall, reverberating off the marble walls. She allowed herself a small, knowing smile as she took a step back, but inside, her heart was racing. The crowd's admiration felt surreal. This was her moment, the culmination of years of quiet practice, of playing in the solitude of her apartment, far away from the judgment of those who didn't understand her. Nathaniel Rivers, however, stood motionless. The pride that had once burned in his chest had been replaced with a deep, uncomfortable silence. He couldn't fathom how someone like Emma, a woman who had appeared so unremarkable, could play with such brilliance. His fingers itched to take back control, to make a grand comeback, but no words left his mouth. Instead, he watched as the audience continued to applaud Emma, some even rising to their feet, their faces filled with awe. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with disbelief and admiration. As Emma stepped down from the stage, she felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. She had never sought recognition, yet here it was, and she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief wash over her. For once, she was not the invisible one, the one who had been ignored for far too long, the one who had been underestimated. She had proven them all wrong. Nathaniel finally broke the silence, though his voice was much softer than before. "That was unexpected," he said, his tone no longer laced with arrogance. Emma turned to face him, her expression calm, her eyes unwavering. "Thank you," she replied simply. The humility in her voice was unmistakable. For a moment, Nathaniel stared at her, still trying to process what had just happened. He had spent years perfecting his craft, yet here was a woman who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere, who had never sought the limelight, showing him what true mastery looked like. "You're not just a simple woman, are you?" Nathaniel asked, the question almost an admission of defeat. Emma shook her head, her smile never faltering. "No, Nathaniel, I'm not." As she walked past him, the audience's admiration still ringing in her ears, she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. It wasn't the applause she cared about. It was the quiet satisfaction of proving herself. As she made her way to the back of the hall, Emma could feel her confidence growing. The weight of judgment had always been there, lingering in the background of her life. But now she had shaken it off. She had shown them all that she was more than what they saw on the surface. And that was the sweetest victory of all. Nathaniel remained on stage, his expression unreadable. He glanced down at his hands, feeling the weight of what had just happened. He had underestimated Emma. He had written her off as just another woman with no place in the world of true talent. But now he had to admit that he was wrong. He had been beaten, not by someone with more fame or more prestige, but by someone whose quiet determination had far surpassed anything he could have imagined. The applause still rang in his ears, but it no longer felt like a victory, felt like a humbling lesson. As Emma stepped outside into the cool evening air, she looked up at the sky, the stars twinkling above her. It was a simple, peaceful moment, one she had dreamed of for so long. She had never craved attention or recognition, but she had craved respect. And now she had earned it, not just from the audience but from herself. She had shown the world and herself that she was capable of so much more than anyone had ever believed. As Emma walked out of the concert hall, she could still feel the weight of the night on her shoulders. The applause was fading, but the energy of the moment lingered, like a warm glow wrapping around her. She had done it. She had proven her worth not with words, but with action. The quiet woman, the one people had always overlooked, had taken center stage and shown everyone her true strength. Nathaniel Rivers, once the epitome of arrogance, had been humbled, and she couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. But as she stepped out into the cool night air, the thrill of the performance began to settle into something more reflective. She had never desired fame or attention. All she wanted was respect. And tonight, she had earned it. Not just from others, but from herself. Emma looked up at the sky, the stars sparkling above her like tiny diamonds scattered across velvet. It was a clear night, and the crisp air filled her lungs as she took a deep breath. She felt alive, like she was finally breathing freely for the first time in years. Her whole life, she had kept her talents hidden, tucked away for fear of judgment, of not being good enough. But tonight, all that had changed. She had stepped out from the shadows and into the light, and the world had seen her for who she truly was. As she made her way down the steps of the concert hall, Emma felt the eyes of the world on her. Some people watched her with awe, others with admiration, but no one could ignore her now. The woman who had been invisible for so long had finally found her place in the world. Nathaniel, on the other hand, was still standing on stage, his hands gripping the edge of the piano, as though the very weight of the moment was pressing down on him. The applause was still echoing in his mind, but it wasn't the kind of applause he was used to. It wasn't the kind that came from admiration or reverence. No, this was different. This was the kind of applause that came from respect, the kind of respect he had taken for granted for so long. He had underestimated Emma, and now, as he stood there, in the spotlight he had so often dominated, he felt a deep, unsettling truth settle in his chest. He had lost. Not just the performance, but to her. To a woman who had never sought the limelight, never craved attention, but who had quietly, relentlessly worked toward her own mastery. Nathaniel turned away from the crowd, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on his skill, his status as a pianist, but now he felt like a fraud. Emma had come out of nowhere, and in one performance, she had shattered the image he had so carefully built. For the first time, he questioned everything he thought he knew about success. Was it really about being the loudest, the most visible? Or was it about quiet determination, about the pursuit of something greater than fame or recognition? He glanced around the hall, but Emma was already gone. She had disappeared into the night, leaving him alone with his thoughts. As the last echoes of the audience's applause faded, Nathaniel felt a wave of humility wash over him. He had been so focused on his own success that he had failed to see the true meaning of what Emma had done. It wasn't about showing off or proving others wrong. It was about showing up, about finding your own voice, no matter how small or quiet it may seem. And Emma had done just that. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. For all his accolades, for all his years of recognition, he had never truly understood what it meant to be a true artist. Emma, with her quiet grace and unwavering determination, had taught him that lesson in the most unexpected way. Nathaniel stayed on stage a little longer, the weight of the moment settling deeper into his bones. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do with this newfound awareness, but one thing was certain. He would never look at music or people the same way again. As he walked off the stage, his steps felt heavier than before, weighed down not by the pressure of competition, but by the quiet understanding that sometimes the greatest victories are the ones you win without even trying. Days passed, and the weight of the night's events still lingered in the back of Emma's mind. She had returned to her quiet routine, back to her simple life. The days seemed to stretch on, and though her performance had been a success, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within her. The respect she had earned from the audience felt real, but it was more than that. It was as if she had finally unlocked a door that had been closed for so long, and behind it, a part of her that she had kept hidden for years was now free. Her fingers itched to play the piano again, but not just for practice, not just for the escape it had once been. Now, music felt like a part of her that needed to be shared. She no longer saw herself as invisible. She had proved herself on that stage, and she knew deep down that her path was no longer just about blending in. She could stand in the spotlight and it was okay. One evening, Emma sat at her piano, the keys beneath her fingers, and she began to play. The music flowed from her with ease, but this time, something was different. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story. The melody spoke to her and she listened. She had once feared judgment, but now, she was free from it. As the final note of her piece echoed in the room, Emma leaned back, her eyes closed, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time, she was truly at peace with herself. Nathaniel, however, was still wrestling with his own thoughts. He had never expected to be so shaken by a simple woman. A week had passed since that night, and he couldn't stop thinking about the performance. He had always prided himself on his talent, his years of hard work, but Emma had made him question everything he thought he knew about success. It wasn't about fame or the number of concert halls you filled. It wasn't about who you were or how others saw you. It was about the quiet moments, the dedication, the hours of practice that no one saw. He hadn't just lost a musical duel that night. He had lost to someone who had something he had never fully understood: true humility. Nathaniel had always believed that talent was something to be flaunted, something to be admired and envied. But Emma had shown him that real talent didn't need to boast. It spoke for itself. His thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when he received a letter. The envelope was simple, unassuming, but it held a message that would once again change his perspective. It was from Emma. "Dear Nathaniel, I wanted to thank you for the challenge. It may have been unexpected, but it was exactly what I needed. Not to prove myself to you or anyone else, but to remind myself that I am worthy of being heard. I'm not a master pianist like you, but I do have my own music to share, and I would love to invite you to listen to it sometime, in a way that doesn't involve competition, but simply the sharing of music between two artists. I hope you'll consider it. With respect, Emma." Nathaniel sat back in his chair, stunned. He had expected many things from Emma: humility, grace, even some degree of apology, but this was different. She had reached out not to boast, not to rub her victory in his face, but to extend an olive branch, to offer something he had never expected from her. An invitation to connect, to share, to collaborate. The idea of sitting down with Emma, a woman he had once dismissed so easily, now seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Nathaniel realized that he had been living in a world where competition was the ultimate measure of success. But Emma had shown him that music, art, and life itself were about so much more than that. It was about connection. It was about respect. And in that moment, Nathaniel made a decision. He would accept her invitation. He would learn from her, not just as a musician, but as a person. He had a lot to learn, and for the first time he was ready to listen. Emma's letter had been more than just words on paper. It had been a bridge between two people who had once been strangers, and it was the start of something much deeper than either of them could have anticipated. The following week, Emma sat by her piano, the familiar keys beneath her fingers, yet something had changed. The past few days had been filled with a quiet anticipation. She had received Nathaniel's letter, and the words had stayed with her, circulating in her mind like a song she couldn't quite place. The idea of playing music with him, of connecting through the very art they both loved, felt like a new chapter. She had never thought that one day she would invite someone like Nathaniel into her space, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt right. Her fingers hesitated on the keys for a moment before she began to play, her mind drifting to that night in the concert hall, the moment when everything had shifted. Nathaniel's presence had once overwhelmed her, making her doubt herself, but now, it was different. She was no longer intimidated by his skill or his reputation. She had her own path to walk, her own music to share. The invitation had been a simple gesture, yet it had opened something inside of her. Meanwhile, Nathaniel had spent the week reflecting on the letter Emma had sent him. He had expected pride, perhaps some form of boasting, but what he had received was completely unexpected: humility. It was as if Emma had silently understood something he hadn't fully realized about himself until now. Success wasn't about being the loudest or the most visible. It wasn't even about winning or losing. It was about creating something real, something meaningful, without worrying about who was watching. For years, Nathaniel had sought validation through competition. It had been the driving force of his career. But in Emma's simple words, he found a sense of peace. He realized that music wasn't just about being better than others. It was about sharing an experience, about creating something beautiful together. When he finally walked into Emma's living room, he was surprised by how at ease he felt. Her home was simple, nothing extravagant, but there was a warmth in the air that he couldn't place. The moment he stepped inside, the quiet was almost overwhelming. He had spent so much of his life in the spotlight, surrounded by people, cameras, and flashing lights, but this was different. This was real. Emma greeted him with a calm smile, her presence steady and welcoming. It was clear that she was no longer the woman who had been intimidated by his confidence. She was someone else now, someone stronger. They exchanged a few pleasantries before Emma gestured toward the piano. "Shall we?" she asked, her voice as soft and gentle as the music that flowed from her. Nathaniel nodded, a little hesitant, but eager to see where this would lead. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew this was a moment unlike any other. As they sat down at the piano together, the room seemed to fade away. There were no competitions here, no need to prove anything. Just two musicians sharing the space, sharing the music. Emma began to play, and Nathaniel followed her lead. At first, it was a little awkward. Two people who had never truly played together trying to find their rhythm. But soon, something beautiful began to happen. The notes intertwined, each one building on the other, creating a melody that was uniquely theirs. Nathaniel felt the music in a way he never had before. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about the connection between them, about the way their fingers moved in perfect harmony. As they played, the tension that had built up in him over the years began to melt away. This was what he had been searching for. He realized the freedom to create, to express himself without fear of judgment. And Emma, in turn, felt a sense of calm she hadn't known she was missing. There was no expectation here, no pressure to perform. She could simply play, and that was enough. When the last note echoed in the room, they both sat in silence for a moment, their fingers lingering on the keys. The sound of the music still filled the air, but there was a quiet understanding between them now. Nathaniel looked at Emma, his eyes full of something he hadn't expected to find. Respect. That was... He started, but the words escaped him. He couldn't quite describe what had just happened. Emma smiled, her eyes warm. "It was just music," she said softly. "But I'm glad we could share it." And in that moment, Nathaniel realized that he had found something far more valuable than recognition or fame. He had found a partner, a fellow artist, someone who understood that the true beauty of music and life was in the quiet moments of connection. In the weeks that followed, Emma and Nathaniel continued to play together, their connection growing deeper with each session. The quiet mornings spent at her piano had become something sacred, a time when neither of them felt the need to compete or prove anything. They were simply two artists, united by their love for music, sharing their thoughts and their stories through the keys. Nathaniel, who had once been obsessed with accolades and public recognition, began to see the world through a different lens. His life, once dominated by the pursuit of success, now seemed to pale in comparison to the peaceful, genuine moments he shared with Emma. There was something freeing about being with someone who understood that true mastery wasn't about applause. It was about the quiet moments, the hours spent honing one's craft in solitude. Emma had become his closest confidant, not because she was eager for attention or validation, but because she shared the same understanding of what it meant to be an artist. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the large windows of Emma's living room, they sat together, each lost in the music that swirled around them. Nathaniel watched her fingers move with a kind of effortless grace, the way she transformed the simple notes into something profound. He had seen the great pianists play, people who could command the stage, people who knew how to dazzle, but Emma was different. There was no showmanship in her playing. It was pure, it was raw, and it was beautiful. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel realized that he didn't have to be the center of attention. He didn't have to impress anyone. What mattered was the music, the moment, and the connection between the people sharing it. Emma, too, had changed. She had always known her place in the world, but playing alongside Nathaniel had given her a sense of validation she never thought she needed. She had always played for herself, but now the music felt like a shared experience. She wasn't just expressing her own thoughts and emotions through her playing. She was connecting with someone else on a level that went beyond words. As their sessions together became more frequent, Nathaniel found himself more and more drawn to the quiet simplicity of Emma's life. She didn't live in the glittering world of concert halls and grand stages. She lived in a small apartment, surrounded by books and records, with a piano that had seen more years than it cared to admit. Yet, there was something so powerful in that simplicity. Emma didn't seek the limelight, didn't need the applause, but there was a strength in that. In the world Nathaniel had been part of, the drive for recognition and success had been everything. But now, as he sat beside her, watching the sunlight catch the keys of her piano, he saw a different kind of success. A success rooted in peace, in mastery without the need for validation, in creating something beautiful for the sake of creating it. One evening, after a particularly powerful session, Nathaniel turned to Emma, his eyes soft with admiration. "I never thought I'd find peace in something like this," he said quietly. Emma smiled, her fingers still resting on the keys. "It's not about finding peace, Nathaniel," she replied. "It's about allowing it to come to you." The words stuck with him long after they parted ways that night. He had spent so much of his life chasing peace, chasing perfection, but he had never once allowed himself to simply let it in. And now, through Emma's quiet wisdom and unassuming presence, he understood what it meant to be truly at peace with himself. As time went on, their friendship deepened, and the music they shared grew richer, more nuanced. They began to compose together, weaving their individual styles into something completely new. Emma had always been content with playing what was written on the page, but Nathaniel had opened her up to the idea of creating something original, something that came from the heart. In return, Emma had taught Nathaniel the value of restraint, the power of simplicity, and the beauty of playing from a place of calm. They were no longer just two musicians playing together. They had become collaborators, each learning from the other, pushing each other to reach new heights. And as they stood side by side at the piano, their hands moving together in perfect harmony, they realized that this was what it was all about. Music, at its core, was about connection. It was about the moments of quiet understanding between two people, and the ability to create something beautiful from that understanding. Nathaniel had once thought that success was about being the best, about standing above the rest. But now he saw the truth. True success was about being able to sit beside someone and make something beautiful together. The world didn't need to know their names, didn't need to applaud their every move. All that mattered was the music they created, and the connection they shared through it. As the months passed, Emma and Nathaniel's collaboration grew stronger. What had started as a simple musical connection had blossomed into something much deeper, a shared understanding of what it meant to create something beautiful. Nathaniel had come to see music not as a competition, but as a form of expression that could connect people in ways that words never could. Emma had taught him to slow down, to listen, and to appreciate the subtleties of the music that often went unnoticed in the rush to impress. For Emma, Nathaniel had opened her eyes to the world of composition, showing her that music could be more than just playing what was written. It could be about creating something entirely new, something born from within. Together, they began to write original pieces, blending their distinct styles into compositions that were uniquely theirs. They spent countless hours in Emma's apartment, the soft sound of the piano filling the room, creating something that was more than just music. It was a shared experience, a reflection of their journey together. One evening, as they finished working on a particularly complex piece, Nathaniel sat back in his chair, his eyes closed as he absorbed the final note. It was the kind of music that made you pause and reflect, the kind that stayed with you long after it had ended. "I never thought I would find something like this," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. Emma looked up from the piano, her fingers still resting lightly on the keys. "Find what?" she asked, her tone soft but curious. "Peace," Nathaniel replied. "I've spent so much of my life chasing after fame, after validation, after being the best. But this feels different, feels right." Emma smiled, her eyes warm. "It's not about being the best, Nathaniel," she said gently. "It's about being true to the music. It's about connecting with it and with each other." Nathaniel nodded, his gaze fixed on the piano in front of him. "I get that now," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I never realized how much I was missing." As the days turned into weeks, Emma and Nathaniel's bond deepened. They continued to create together, sharing ideas, playing, and composing without the pressure of competition or expectation. For both of them, the music had become a space of freedom, a place where they could express themselves without fear of judgment. It was a quiet revolution, one that had changed their lives in ways neither of them could have anticipated. One afternoon, as they sat together in the sun-dappled living room, Nathaniel turned to Emma with a thoughtful expression on his face. "What do you think we should do with this music?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "It feels important, you know?" Emma looked at him, her fingers resting lightly on the piano keys. "I think we should share it," she said simply. "Not for the applause or the recognition, but because it's ours. Because it's something we've created together." Don't think the world needs to know our names or our story. The music itself is enough. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need to be the center of attention. What mattered was the music, the journey, and the connection they had shared. "You're right," Nathaniel said finally, his voice steady. "The music is enough." And with that, they made the decision. They would share their music, not with the expectation of fame or fortune, but simply because it was a reflection of who they were, a testament to their growth, their connection, and the journey they had taken together. They recorded their compositions not for the world to judge, but for themselves. They would release it, let it go, and let the music speak for itself. It wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had created something meaningful. As the final notes of their last piece faded into the room, Emma and Nathaniel sat in silence, their hands resting on the keys. There were no words left to say. They had found everything they needed in the music, and in each other. Months passed since their decision to share their music, and as the seasons shifted, Emma and Nathaniel's lives continued to evolve, quietly, without the fanfare they had once believed they needed. They released their compositions online, under no labels, no expectations, just a simple offering to the world, a small corner of their shared journey. The response was subtle but meaningful. Some listeners found their music in the vast sea of online content and left thoughtful comments. Others quietly appreciated the melodies, but none of it mattered as much as the fact that they had created something real together. It wasn't the world's validation they were after, but the quiet satisfaction of having completed this part of their journey. One afternoon, as they sat in the warmth of Emma's living room, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, a peaceful smile on his face. "You know," he said slowly, "I've never felt more content in my life. Not because of the music, not because of anything we've done publicly, but just because of this." He gestured to the room, the piano, the sunlight streaming through the window, the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "This quiet," he continued, "this peace. I never knew how much I needed it until I found it here, with you." Emma smiled, her fingers lightly touching the keys. "I know what you mean," she said softly. "It's funny, isn't it? We spent so much time running after things, after achievements, after approval, but it turns out, it's the simple things that make us feel whole. The quiet moments, the genuine connections, the music." Nathaniel nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He had spent so much of his career chasing something, but he hadn't realized that what he was chasing was exactly what Emma had shown him. A life full of meaning, without the need for constant recognition. The music they had created together was a reflection of that shift in their hearts. It was raw, it was imperfect, but it was authentic. And that was enough. It was enough to create, to share, and to simply be. They had learned to stop measuring their worth by the applause or the attention they received and started measuring it by how true their work was to their hearts. They had learned that success wasn't defined by what others saw. It was defined by how they felt about what they had created. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, sipping tea after a long day, Nathaniel looked at Emma with a thoughtful expression. "You've changed me, you know," he said, his voice quiet. "Before I met you, I thought success was about being at the top, about being the best. But now I see it differently. I see that real success is about peace, about finding balance, and about making something meaningful no matter how small the audience." Emma's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch his hand. "I think you always had that inside of you," she said. "It just took finding the right space, the right people to bring it out. We're all just searching for the same thing, Nathaniel. Peace, connection, love. And once you realize that, everything else falls into place." They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the wind rustling outside mingling with the soft hum of the piano in the background. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt at peace. He no longer sought validation from the outside world. He had found it within himself, within the music, and most importantly, within the quiet moments he shared with Emma. He had found what he was looking for, not in the loud applause or the bright lights, but in the simple act of being. The next day, as they sat together again, the sun streaming through the window, Emma turned to Nathaniel, her eyes bright. "Do you ever wonder what's next for us?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity. Nathaniel smiled, his heart full. "No," he replied. "I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be, right here, right now." And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel knew he was telling the truth. He had found peace, not in the future, not in what might come next, but in the present, in the quiet, in the music, and in the connection they shared. The years passed, and Emma and Nathaniel's connection only deepened. Their music, once a quiet exploration of their shared passion, had blossomed into something that neither of them had expected. It had become their life's work, a testament to the journey they had taken together. What started as two people seeking peace through their art had evolved into something more, something that reflected not only their musical talents but their growth as individuals. They were no longer just two musicians playing together. They were partners, collaborators, and friends, each bringing something unique to the table. The music they created spoke of their personal transformation, the shift from seeking external validation to finding peace within themselves. They had become known for their unique style, their ability to blend the complexities of classical music with the simplicity of their emotions. It wasn't about being the best anymore. It was about being true to their art. Their small, intimate performances had begun to draw larger crowds. People came not just for the music, but for the story behind it. The story of two people who had once been caught up in the chase for recognition but had found something far more valuable: each other, and the peace that came with creating something honest and real. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, Nathaniel found himself reflecting on everything that had led them to this point. He stood backstage, watching as Emma packed away their instruments, her movements graceful and calm. "I never thought I'd end up here," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I thought it was all about being on top, being the best. But now I see that what we've built, what we've created, is more than enough. It's everything." Emma looked up at him, a soft smile on her face. "We don't need to be on top, Nathaniel," she said, her voice steady, yet filled with warmth. "We've found something more important. We've found peace, and we've found each other." Nathaniel smiled back, his heart swelling with pride and contentment. He had found something far more meaningful than success or fame. He had found balance, a sense of inner peace that had eluded him for so long. He had found Emma. Together, they had built something beautiful, not just in their music, but in the way they had learned to live. It wasn't about what the world thought of them anymore. It was about the moments they shared, the quiet mornings spent writing music, the nights spent playing in the comfort of their own home. For them, that was success. As the years went on, Emma and Nathaniel continued to play, to create, and to share their music. They traveled less, preferring the peace of their home to the hustle of the world outside. They had everything they needed, and nothing else seemed to matter. They had each other, they had their music, and they had the peace that came with knowing they were living their truth. One afternoon, as they sat together by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Nathaniel turned to Emma, his eyes filled with a quiet joy. "You know, I never thought I would be this happy," he said softly. "I've spent so much of my life chasing something I thought I needed, but it was always right here, with you." Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with love and understanding.